You're in the show. I think we're live. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us right here. Dr. Stephen Greer, Blake
Good to
Cousins.
see you.
It's good to be here. We have the new documentary that we're going to be discussing. I guess basically the world's talking about it. Age of Disclosure. You're calling it Age of Deception. There's a lot of things that were missing in this
Yeah.
documentary. They wanted to highlight a lot of military people that have come forward, people high up. They expect us to believe the government all of a sudden. What's your initial take
Right.
on Age of Disclosure? They seem to miss a lot of points.
Well, I think, the main thing that people need to understand is it's been done by people who are operatives for the cabal that have been keeping this secret for, 80 years. To quote a senior CIA officer who's now must be around 80 years old, who I've known since the 90s, the folks who've made this are, as he calls it, the rat pack that have been deceiving the U.S. government, the public, and the media for decades, quote unquote. So I think what people need to understand is that many of the points in there that are true are ones that were already brought out very clearly in the 90s and the early 2000s through the Disclosure Project, and that much of what is then inserted is a very subtle psychological warfare spin. So to understand this, the best disinformation is a combination of fact, and then there's a and then they fold into those facts that are true false narratives and false spin. And that we knew was going to happen in the late 90s. I wrote a paper called When Disclosure Serves Secrecy, meaning when a disclosure process is overtaken and is hijacked by folks who have really are serving the interests of this covert group. Now, specifically in the film, it mentions, that over and over that yes, there's been a reverse engineering program for 80 years dealing with the retrieved non-human craft, but that somehow nothing in the skies we're looking at are the result or the fruits of that labor, that it's all alien, including the Tic Tac, which we have established was a Lockheed Skunk Works device, which, by the way, for those of you who want to see it, we have a book out that's come out recently, this book, that's an illustrated history of disclosure that I did with Michael Schratt, and it clearly illustrates the cases that are non-human ET craft, EVs, extraterrestrial vehicles, and the ones that are man-made. And we have a one in here that's from the 1960s from Pennsylvania of exactly looking like the Tic Tac that was seen. That is a known man-made object. We have two whistleblowers, separate, who don't know each other, who saw that object being utilized, one in a top secret operation in Syria some years ago, not that many years ago, and another one in the early 90s being offloaded from a C-130 transport for use in the Gulf region back in the first Gulf War. So I think this is a big problem where deliberately the people who are putting out this film, I don't think the director, to be honest with you, Dan Farah, who I met with for many hours some years ago, uh, would say was not very astute. And I think he's being used by people who he thinks would know what they're talking about. And they do, but they're only telling a half truth. And a half truth is more dangerous than a straight out lie. People who just debunk and say none of this exists. But at that point, that ship has sailed. We've established that the UFOs are real. Some are of extraterrestrial origin, but it turns out some 80% of the ones people see zipping around are man-made, being used in illegal and clandestine operations. Now, this film is really a hijacking attempt to hijack disclosure into a false narrative that presents it as a threat. If you see through this movie, over and over and over again, they keep harping on the national security threat. Well, where is that coming from? If the ETs were a threat, we would have had our clock cleaned the day the atomic bomb exploded in 1945. So the fact is there's no evidence that they have attacked us. There's every evidence we've been attacking them, and that's the second part of the false narrative, or third part. The first is that these objects are not man-made when they are. That's the biggest cover-up, by the way, is that we humans have this technology, right? And that it's been used in criminal operations, drug running, human trafficking, child trafficking, uh, abductions, kidnappings, murder, covert operations. And we can document this. Luckily, senior people in law enforcement and intelligence in the United States, to whom we have handed over all our whistleblowers and evidence, now know this to be the case. And to quote one senior special forces operative, they're all having right now an oh shit moment. So this film isn't going to deceive those people, but it's designed to deceive the run of the mill politician or media person or public who don't have a depth of information. And that's what we're trying to correct with this podcast. And this is why I'm calling this podcast, Age of Deception, not Age of Disclosure. And the danger of it is that on top of saying these aren't ours and we haven't figured out how these work, that what that does is cover up the fact of this legacy criminal operation that's been using these advanced reverse engineered alien so-called technologies for decades in very dangerous and increasingly dangerous ways. But it also gives the impression, therefore, that everything that's UFO related that's happened out there is alien. For example, in this movie, they cite a Soviet nuke that somehow was being activated by the ETs. In reality, that craft that did that, in all likelihood, was one of ours. And this is, you have to take this into your, paradigm when you realize, well, was it one of the non-human ones or was it one of ours? You have both going on very actively. The other part of it is that we have a colonel from the Soviet Union who gave us his full testimony 4 years ago for the 20th anniversary of the Disclosure Project public launch in 2001 at the National Press Club, who has stated emphatically, and this is in our archive, we can put a link in there to his testimony, that there was a nuclear thermonuclear warhead that was overheating, and the ETs actually came in and fixed it. In other words, they put everyone at that silo and base sort of in a stasis, and they went in and stopped this missile from overheating and exploding, which could have triggered, a response of DEFCON 1. We'd been at World War III. So contrary to how they're portrayed, in fact, the ETs have been very careful to try to buy us time while we sort out our own social situation on this planet and politically. But there's no evidence that they have done things to try to instigate a war like that. And so what you have is that, the same set of facts then spun in a direction of a national security threat. But here's the headline: the national security threat is not coming from the ETs. It is coming from this covert group that this film is really a front for. So I think this is where you get into a very dangerous game being played here because of the stature of some of the people with military credentials and intelligence credentials. Your run of the mill politician from the White House on down is going to think that this is a correct assessment when it's a false assessment, and it's deliberately a false narrative, so it's dangerous. So I am calling for a boycott of people not viewing this film, because even if you see it for free on a site that has ads and stuff, the money is going to that organization. So I would recommend people not see it, number one. Number two, I think it's very important that you write to members of Congress and to the White House and say that the narrative of this film, that there's a threat from out there, is false, that the threat is coming from our own human misuse of these reverse engineered technologies. Put it very simply, that's the threat. It's coming from us, from within. And then the other is that the narrative that somehow, as Dr. Putoff said, that, well, some of these we've acquired because they've just landed and given them to us, or they've, became disabled or got lost coming through interstellar and transdimensional space-time, and we've acquired them. And that's a big cover up of the fact we're using illegal, internationally banned electromagnetic pulse weapons to target and down ET craft, and we began to do so in the 40s with electronic weapon systems. So it's not like they're just somehow getting lost in space and land in the middle of the desert near Roswell or Nevada test range or near the Lockheed Skunk Works. No, they're being downed. And we have abundant whistleblower testimony to this effect. And at the same time, we have multiple people who've been on these retrieval teams who have come forward, some of them name, rank, and serial number, such as Sergeant Clifford Stone and back in the day, and he's passed away, but new ones who have been operational at these black sites, who where these weapons are used to down these ET craft, and with at the same time not every day, but on occasion, strike a man-made UFO. I mean, to test it, but then we'll also strike an aircraft like a Cessna airplane and take them down. Now, I and some special forces guys for the last 2.5 years or 3 years have worked with some folks who operate and have been operators at these facilities out west in the desert of the United States. And all this information and those personnel have been passed over to intelligence and military investigators and law enforcement. So this movie covers up all of that, and they know better. I will say for a fact, everything I just said is known, not necessarily by the director, but by the people actually in the film. So this sort of is a cover up of the real information that the public and the politicians and our government needs, looking like disclosure. So it's a head fake, and I think we need to call it out for that. And of course, we knew this was coming back when Mr. Elizondo first surfaced in 2017 or so. But I think if people actually want to see a disclosure film, they should see Unacknowledged, which even a former president, Bill Clinton, has recommended to people. That's what they should be seeing. And you can see that on Amazon Prime and Tubi and everywhere else. If you want to see the technology development, look at The Lost Century, which documents 100 years of exotic technologies, both human and extraterrestrial, that have been applied in these advanced technologies that are being used now, where they're deceiving the public that these are all, quote, alien, when they're not. If they were all alien, that would be, one thing, but they're not. And so if you don't believe that's possible because you're being lied to, then you're in trouble. Now, Blake, we were our friend Jim Goodall, who is a well-known aerospace historian and writer, has had the last conversation with Ben Rich of the Lockheed Skunk Works, right? Well,
Oh, the letter.
remember, yeah, and we have the letters too, but this was the last week of his life. And at our 2023 National Press Club event at the conference, uh, before the press conference, our private conference there in DC, uh, Mr. Goodall stood up and told this story. And he said point blank that Ben Rich said anything you can imagine or that you've seen on Star Trek, we've already done at the Lockheed Skunk Works, and it's not at Area 51. It's out here in the desert near the Lockheed Skunk Works. And I know where that is because now I've been to that site and I've been right above it and the underground opening. I have the video and photographs of that. So the problem here is that if this key part of the UFO phenomenon, or whatever you want to call it, is covered up, it leaves our leaders, whether they be military who are not read in and told, or the president or Congress, and the public and the media, to think everything UFO related that's been an atrocity is ET, when in fact the atrocious and violent things that have happened haven't been ET. They've been this covert organization doing a deceptive operation or a false flag operation since the late 50s and early 60s. So that's the other point. You have to unpack the fact that, in 2001, we had people come forward and, Brad Sorensen had been at the 1988 air show there at the decommissioned Air Force Base in California, where there was a covert air show and where the alien reproduction vehicles, or ARVs, three of them, were in a covert hangar. And he was allowed to go in and see them. And those were built in the late 50s and early 60s. And at that time, he said, had been all out in space and even around our solar system, not interstellar. So before we landed on the moon, we had these clandestine aircraft zipping around. And so you can imagine if something like that's been operational for 65 plus years, Imagine what they have today after trillions of dollars further in reverse engineering. And the most brilliant scientists I had personally ever met work in these programs in a clandestine program that's a black operation that isn't known by members of Congress and the White House. And this is now gets into this other question. You'll notice in there are people like Senator Marco Rubio, who's now Secretary of State, and some others, but they are people with just introductory level of information. So we have gone in and provided further information exposing the rest of this. But one of the problems is that if you have people with PhDs at Harvard and sterling military credentials who are on the payroll of this cabal, they'll go in and neutralize that and say, oh, we don't have anything like that. Or if we do, you shouldn't be talking about it. In fact, I have a member of Congress recently told me that he was ordered by one of the figures in this film not to look into the human tech, that it was too dangerous.
What
So,
was it?
but that's the
Boycott? Is a boycott of any of the man-made that they told the director refuse? Don't even mention that half of the story.
yeah,
That's the whole
yeah,
enchilada right there that they're
yeah,
keeping out. Is this a psyop
yeah,
kind of thing? It seems like it's a copy
yeah, of
paste
course.
kind of
Yeah.
major media thing. I never seen such hype from the major media on any film like this.
Well, no, here's what you have to understand. Everyone needs to understand this. If they are carrying water for covert programs that have excellent relationships with Fox News and the major media and what have you, those doors are going to open for the psyop and will close for the truth. This is the big mistake. And we proved this back in the 90s that the media and the internet itself is actually controlled by people who have ties into this transnational criminal organization, and when it comes to anything this important, are completely controlled. And this is why you'll see the false narrative and people carrying the ball of the false narrative have every door open, and anyone who tries to speak the truth, the door is slammed, right? And that's also been true of these sort of dog and pony foolish hearings in Congress about this, where we have given a list of about 50 high value targets and whistleblowers who actually have handled the craft and handled the bodies and operated the machinery that have downed the ET craft or been on retrieval teams who are still living. Those people never get subpoenaed. Those people
They're the
never get called
first-hand
to testify.
eyewitnesses.
Yeah,
They're
and
the
these
first
are
these guys that are talking in this documentary, don't get me wrong, the documentary shot beautifully, everything's scored, everything's edited nice, and it looks
right.
great. And like you say, they're giving
Who cares?
maybe 80,
Yeah.
50% of the truth, and then they leave out the main substance of it. Again, so is the agenda of the film it seems to me that we better be afraid of the aliens because they're coming. They're wanting to disable our
Right.
nukes. When in fact, you just said that they helped disable a major accident, but then they turn it and say, "Oh, look, that they try to turn it on." So
Right.
it's
Well, they've even raided some of our early Disclosure Project witnesses, like Captain Solace is in there. And when I first debriefed him back in the late 90s, early 2000, about the year 2000, he told us very specifically that when he was in that silo where those 18 or so nuclear warheads were taken offline and unlaunchable, that the message he was getting was that they were saying, please don't blow up this beautiful planet and go to defense condition one where there's a full out nuclear launch on both sides, because it would destroy all life on Earth. But if you do take it that far, we can intervene and try to stop this, to save your bacon, right? To save this planet and humanity. And yet he and many other people have then been hijacked, and their narrative has been used in the opposite way that the ETs intended. So even the actual ET events that we know of have been spun. And this is CIA psychological warfare ops at its best, where they take the same fact and spin it in the direction of the narrative, the false narrative that serves their purpose. And what would that be? Trillions of more dollars in military spending and weaponizing space so that they can be enriched, but also create a totalitarian global network where everyone's afraid of the aliens so they can step in and seize more and more power. This has nothing to do with the truth. Now, are there many points in this film that are true? Of course. Every point in this film, there are, well, they call them NHI or ET or maybe interdimensional. We'll talk about that in a minute, that whole canard. Uh, and that there has been reverse engineering and we have acquired craft. But those
Uh-oh. Looks like we got you, Steve?
we'll just have to edit this out. Tell
We're good.
Sarah not to call me. I don't know. And that this is not, something that is. Here's the key thing, is that if you cover up the biggest part of this story, which is not the ET part, it's the human part,
Yeah.
then you're also taking out of the paradigm of information for leaders in the media and the public where the threat's really coming from. And that has been the intention of much of what's gone on with, I call it the fake disclosure movement that is trying to overtake disclosure. And in fact, unfortunately, in many ways, is because they have access to major media that we don't, because if you start telling the truth on this, you'll get blacklisted from the major media. So I think this is one of the problems, is it's a sort of a information warfare game going on. And uh, the idea that civilizations have come here and just are landed, this is another part of that cover up, or that we don't have anything that works this way. The other part of it is that they also know that there is a law enforcement and strike team bearing down very quickly on the fact that there is a large criminal, uh, racketeering influence corrupt organization that is running these legacy programs that have been involved in unsanctioned killings of US citizens to maintain secrecy, unconstitutional actions, embezzlement of federal funds, and all manner of other criminal activity, up to and including, as I mentioned, trafficking in humans and drugs and what have you, using these advanced technologies. In fact, our whistleblower, Michael Herrera, the Marine, came across one of those operations in Indonesia in 2009, where they were loading crated up humans onto a man-made octagonal shaped UFO to be taken for human experimentation and use. And we have other whistleblowers who have been on the receiving end of that, where they've been able to document those operations where they're bringing people in to be used. And of course, anyone who would have seen that object would have sworn it was an extraterrestrial object if they didn't have this information. So this part of the cover up that's going on in this movie is the most dangerous part of it, because what they're doing, they're leaving all the scary things people have heard about UFOs that humans have done using man-made tech, and laying all of that on the ETs or NHI.
Well, it
And
seemed like,
that's how you end up in World War III, my friend.
yeah.
I'll tell you, I mean, I gave up my medical career in part to bring out this technology that would save the biosphere, but the larger and more immediate concern has been avoiding this juggernaut that Werner von Braun, who invented the rocket, warned about, and that is that we were going to create a alien threat from space, so that the world would unite under some sort of totalitarian fascist regime. And I think this movie is actually sort of the final warning bell that that's what's going to be coming in 2026 and 2027 if we don't wake up. I will be blunt. And the time is not very, we don't have a long leash anymore on this. This is coming up very quickly. And I think the public needs to be aware of that. And that's why I'm doing this podcast today.
When we spoke with DC Long, Michael Herrera, Digna, these guys were firsthand whistleblowers, and it seems that they're military insiders,
Mhm.
but they were saying that this stuff was man-made, reverse engineered. And
Right.
the next documentary, it didn't seem that they wanted to touch that with a 10-foot pole. When we're talking with these guys in the documentary Battle for Disclosure and Asymmetric Disclosure, and we also talked to Luis Elizondo for a second, it seems that they refuse to speak to these firsthand whistleblowers that acknowledge that these are man-made, reverse engineered. They just want to keep it as a threat. But with Lou Elizondo, do
Yep.
you
Well,
remember?
it's even worse than that. You know, you have to understand that even Congresswoman Luna has blocked those whistleblowers from testifying before the House Oversight Committee, because I've met with other members of the committee and they're not allowed. And these are people who don't need a subpoena. These are people who have impeccable credentials, who can be proven, and where there has been corroboration. In the case of the Herrera situation in Indonesia, that has been multiply corroborated by people in the intelligence community and military. So by independently. And so, and yet that is will not be allowed to be told because it's exposing this criminal organization, and it's exposing the fact that we have those technologies. Now, the film brings up one point that is of some concern, and that is some of these are also from foreign adversaries, quote unquote, such as China and Russia. Russia does have this tech, and I presume, although don't have good information there, that China probably does. But when you're dealing with these sort of technologies, the transnational organization running this work seamlessly with their Russian and Chinese counterparts. I remember in the early 90s, a CIA guy saying, yeah, we're adversaries on most issues, but on this, we work hand in glove. And this was said to me by a senior CIA guy back in the early 90s. So I think there is a sort of naivete about the nature of this transnational. I don't use the word international. That presupposes one country talking to another. This is an organization that sits atop that and is transcends it, above it, that operates. And that architecture of the secrecy and the organization doing this needs to be understood by politicians and the public. But yes, certainly there are. But this begs the question of is it really quote unquote Russian and Soviet or American, or is it all coming from this transnational organization that is global and is criminal? And I think this is something to be determined. I can't answer that definitively when you start talking about countries where I do not have firsthand direct insiders, such as China. But so this gets into a big question mark. But it certainly needs to be understood, and it needs to be understood that uh, the epicenter of technology, research and development on ET technology, non-human technology, is the United States, and that we have the most advanced systems, to the point that one of the teams we met with, who is or a black site that retrieved these objects, have said very specifically that the uh, ET craft and the man-made ones have become so close in how they operate and appear that they almost are indistinguishable
Yeah.
once they're 3D, once they're right there. And not if you acquire it and take it apart, but by looking. And this becomes a real problem because in terms of a deceptive operation, which is a false flag, actually in the military is called a deceptive indication and warning. It's a deceptive operation. And so this gives this organization the ability to totally trick everyone that something is alien when it's ours. And this has been going on for decades. So a lot of people ask me, when did the false flag operation, when will it happen? I said, it started in the late 50s and early 60s.
When so you have people that are giving the filmmaker advice on who to talk to, what's the narrative. Are you claiming that maybe Lou Elizondo, I guess he's an executive producer in this, so he's going to be getting, he's getting a pretty big cut of the film. He's the one, I think, that gave the filmmaker access to these people. Are they controlling the narrative? I remember when Lou Elizondo, we asked him to have a conversation with you a few years back, and we're going to have, maybe there's going to be a debate or a conversation. He was invited. You agreed to do this, and then next thing you know, he was calling us the Felon Five. And I guess in the film,
Right.
I guess I think in the film he's saying that he's been attacked, and he's being attacked in the on the internet. Well, he was the one that was going on the internet talking to everybody and anybody that he could
Yeah.
with regards to this.
Right.
And his whole objective was to blow the UFO community into a million pieces. Quote, I think that's what he said. And he also said that
Mhm.
we're part of the Felon Five and we're the equivalent of John Jones and Heaven's Gate, and we wanted to have a and I think we discussed that in the
Well,
in
and of course, and more
about
recently,
secret.
they told everyone in Congress that I'm a that if they told everyone in Congress that I'm a Russian foreign agent, and then a Mossad agent. Now, I'm not kidding. I mean, this
Yeah,
literally has happened in the last couple of years, which of course is only untrue and ridiculous, and it's also a felon. Talk about a felony. It's a
yeah.
felony to say someone is a foreign agent when they're not, in order to disrupt the flow of information to a federal investigation of something like the UFO issue. So, but this, I've had more than one member of Congress tell me they were told point blank that I'm a Russian foreign agent or a Mossad foreign agent, which is false. But I think that that is exactly what you would expect people to do. They are desperate to have disclosure happen now, but they're desperate that it be a false disclosure. They're desperate that that narrative go that direction. And again, I don't think that Mr. Farah, who, as I said, is not very astute, um, knows enough to make that call. I think he saw an opportunity to make a film with people with credentials, and he seized it and he did it, which is okay. I mean,
Mhm.
he's Hollywood. He's not a scientist. He's not an investigator, and he's a money guy. He's a money person. So that I understand. It's not hard to figure that motivation out. It's very Philistine. It's your typical LA Hollywood money grubbing scene. But I don't think that the people who are actually put this thing together, like Jay Stratton and others, they certainly know better. And Dr. Hal Puthoff certainly knows better. But I think that at the same time, the public being introduced to this, and I will say by the public, I also mean the president of the United States and the members of Congress. I consider the public, because they don't have much information on this. Keep in mind that when I met a few months ago with a former national security advisor for President Trump in his first term, I was assured that they were never given any information on this. There was a complete information blackout. And this surprises people. I said, well, it doesn't surprise me, because when I was asked to brief the CIA director for President Clinton, he and the president had been denied access, even though they knew something was going on. And President Clinton had ordered an investigation, just like Jimmy Carter did before him, and other presidents have when they're trying to get to the bottom of it. The only president who got closest to this was uh, President Kennedy, who of course they killed him. But and Mr. Clinton, I will say, President Clinton, of all the living known presidents, got the closest to being able to do something about it, but he got submarined and threatened and threw his hands up eventually. Uh, but when you have covert programs that are unconstitutional and treasonous like this, the people who are now being looked at hard by the most senior people in law enforcement in the United States, and I know this to be a fact, they're on the run to try to look like they're being good boys now and disclosing things, but they're disclosing it in a way that's totally gaslighting the salient, most important aspects of it, and which covers up their own criminal activity. So it's, in a way, it's a disclosure that furthers the cover up. So,
It's
which
going in
is
exactly the
exactly
wrong
what you would
direction.
expect.
Mhm. The wrong
Yeah,
direction.
of
Yeah.
course.
What about
And
Mellon?
and
We got
also
these guys that
the
are.
dangerous direction here.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, he knows better. Look, Mellon knows better. Look, all these people, I don't need to go through name by name. All of those folks in there are people who are either been co-opted innocently, like Mr. Salas, was a military witness, or they're people who are central to this spearhead of disinformation going to the public, like Elizondo and Jay Stratton and Hal Puthoff and others. And they know that. And now I will also say, luckily, the senior levels of the intelligence community now and law enforcement do know that. I will say, for personal fact, I know that this is aware. In fact, one of the top guys that I'm working with in that arena, as soon as this film dropped, he says, "Well, this is a classic CIA psyop." psychological warfare operation, because they see all the false things in it, the false narrative, and what they're covering up and leaving out. It's not so much of what's in it, it's what isn't in it,
Is it?
and also what they have deliberately deceived about. And you know this, when that first thing came out about the Tic Tac with the pilot David Fravor flying the Hornet F-18, I said, look, that's one of ours, and we had this in our files for a long time, this Tic Tac object. And since then, multiple other military firsthand witnesses have come forward, including a Green Beret who we have debriefed, who has seen that same device in use by human military operations. But when you have an incursion of a military operating area, or a classified area of something that the mainstream military doesn't know about, then it's going to be assumed it's a foreign adversary or it's alien. When in reality, it's a cell, it's a compartmented operation within our own system doing this. And they're the ones deceiving their colleagues. And this is, I know for most people, they would go, wow, this is really worse than we think. And that's what's happening in some circles now. There's a sort of an awakening happening where they go, excuse my language, where they literally are having a quote, oh shit moment, that this is true and that what we've been saying for 30 years is absolutely true. Now, the problem with a film like this, it's laying the foundation for the government and the media and the public to be taken in a false direction, so that anything that happens in the future with these reverse engineered extraterrestrial technologies, the man-made objects, will be assumed by everyone to be alien. And so the more they stage false operations and false flag operations, well, they have neutralized the possibility that it's ours.
Yeah.
And they're also trying to play the national security card there. Oh, well, our own technologies we can't talk about because that's really top secret.
Yeah,
Actually,
they're
it's
actually.
not top secret. It's not. No, here's a point I made to a member of Congress recently. I made it to Congressman Burleson and a few others, and Ogles and a few others. I said, look, if it's an illegal operation, it has no clearance. You can't have it both ways. You cannot use the national security laws to cover up a criminal enterprise. Therefore, there is no top secret classification on it. And this is the foundation of the Disclosure Project. So, anyone listening to this, if you're military, intelligence, corporate, government, and you have knowledge of this, you are not bound by your non disclosure agreement on this specific issue. There may be related ones where you would be, and that's for to be determined. But on this particular issue, those programs have been run in an illegal and treasonous fashion since the late 1950s. And therefore, you absolutely are not bound by it. And I think this is the other problem. You don't afford, I made this joke to a member of Congress. If you were bringing in a mafia don to interrogate him, would you put him in a skiff so what he had to say would be secret? No, you wouldn't.
Mm-mm.
Why would you cover up? Why would you afford the dignity of a top secret skiff and a top secret status to a criminal organization? Now, when I first said this many years ago, people said, what are you talking about? And I said, let's reference what I call my inverse whistleblowers, witnesses, not the ones who are there, the ones who should know who don't. The president, the CI director, the chairman of key oversight committees, Senate Intelligence, Armed Services, House Oversight. I've dealt with people at that level since the early 90s. The head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Wilson, the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. It goes on and on and on. The ministers of defense of the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, all of whom I met with personally. So when you have operations that are being run without the oversight and knowledge of the constitutional empowered authorities, it is by definition treasonous and illegal. So they can't claim a top secret thing here, but they've been using that to scare members of Congress if they begin to look into the human technology.
That's kind of the
And this
first
has
thing
been
that
said to me.
that's the first thing that Lou Elizondo said when he the documentary started up. Like, there's some things that I won't be able to tell you because of my NDA. I can't tell you this, I can't tell you this, but I'll tell you this. So it really leads you down to
That's
nowhere. Where
false.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so the NDA
that
doesn't exist under this illegal operation, and the agenda just seems a little wacky. Where you're dropping the exact locations to where the bodies are, to the where the material are,
right.
where these things are housed, and you're dropping
Yep.
names of people behind the cover up.
Right.
Where they're not giving us any kind of new information, except I think the documentary did one good thing. They're letting people know that we're not alone. I think they got that
Right.
accomplished. Everybody's like, wow, this is disclosure, where they didn't give us any evidence, but hey, look, there are all these government officials saying that we're not alone, the NHI. So I think they got that part right. Obviously, they're leaving
Right.
out this other intention. But do you think, as the filmmakers are suggesting, and some people online are suggesting, that this is going to get Donald Trump's interest, where he's going to come forward and bring disclosure? Is this the documentary that's going to make the
No, I mean, he already, no, no, I mean,
yeah,
look,
I'm
I
asking
mean,
this just
here's
because
something.
people are bringing
No,
this
I
up.
mean, look, here's the president's briefing document. You can get it through our store, drstevengreer.com. You can go see it. Same thing with the book, the Disclosure and Illustrated History, that has all these crash retrieval cases. Um, Honestly, he knows. We also have provided a one sheet summary with 5 executive orders that he has already seen and read and digested. There are other people in the administration that have been met with that have great amount of beginning information. So, the big problem here is that anyone looking at this film who think this is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and not the psyop spin piece that it is, will be deceived. And here's the problem. It's taken me 35 years to unpack the complexity of this mess. And you have politicians who are very busy, Rubio, now Secretary of State, the Director of National Intelligence, all these people. Unless it's someone who's been in the legacy programs, and there are a couple of people in the administration who are, and we know who they are, you're flying blind, and don't have much time to drill down on it, and you're going to do quick and dirty briefings. And the danger is that if anyone were to see this film and think that it's actually anywhere near a truthful accounting of the problem, they're going to be greatly deceived. And that is a risk. So this is why I say this is sort of like an information war going on of the full and truthful disclosure versus a false disclosure, which of course we always knew was going to happen. And if you go back to the 90s, I said very clearly, because many of the people who were even around back then that are in this new film, The Age of Deception, as I'm calling
Well,
it.
it's not quite new. They've
Um,
been working on
I,
it for
I, I,
about
I,
4 years.
I knew what they were. I knew what they were doing. No, this goes back to. I mean, some of these characters go back decades and
Mhm.
long
Yeah,
before Elizondo's time, and
old school
and
players.
so I've known them, and I know who they are and who they answer to, and what their jobs actually are, as opposed to their public personas. But I think this is a problem that isn't fooling people at a certain level, but it could easily fool someone in the Oval Office or in the Congress who are just recently learning about this. And as one member of Congress said, we don't know what to believe or who to believe, right? So that's the other strategy. We bring in all our factual information and direct witnesses and documents and sites. And if you go to our archive, the dpiarchive.com, you'll see 150 sites where these UFOs are, including the black sites, and many of them have a pin exactly where you go underground to get to them, right? It's right there. And this has been provided to these folks. But then, you'll have people come in who have sterling military or intelligence credentials. Well, that's not true. So then you get into the who do you believe thing when you're
Yeah,
new to this and you don't have thousands of hours to spend doing the original research yourself.
it's an
So
effective
this is
tool.
where a group it's a very effective tool to deceive. This is why I'm calling it the age of deception, to deceive key people away from the full truth. And without a full accounting of the facts, right? You're going to make wrong policy decisions, very mistaken policy decisions.
When I'm looking
I
at
mean,
the
let's not forget.
I'm looking at some of the public reaction, and I've heard some blowback by some people talking giving their own opinions, just opinions, talking
Right.
maybe
Right.
not so positive of the film, and they're getting copywritten stricken. And there's a lot of suppression on just people talking the other counter to it. And I do see that the public is aware.
How are they getting copywritten
Oh, they'll
oh,
just
because
like
they're
show a
using parts of the film.
poster or show a little bit of the
Oh,
trailer,
I see.
and and
Hmm.
it's and they're just small channels, and they're going after
Uh-huh.
anybody that's just talking negative about it. We're not talking negative. We're just like saying there's another side to this story here. They left the crucial part out, and
Yeah,
they're
by
doing
design, but this is the problem. This is not that they didn't know; it's being done deliberately for its own manipulation. And
I'm saying the public is aware though. There's a lot of comments out there that are praising the film, but then I'll say like 80-70% are understanding that there's really nothing new in the film, that they've
no,
learned
there's not.
that
Yeah.
we haven't learned anything. It's just a panel of I think 32 people that have come forward that are high ranking in the government. So people are kind of in awe because of that. But they refuse to bring any civilian evidence as well. I think the director says we're not going to show any UFO videos because people just think it's AI or CGI, which is just
Hmm.
totally takes away a whole aspect of the field of
You're right.
video evidence. Well, let's bring in the
Yeah,
evidence.
well, that one of the things we do in this book is to show, in this illustrated history of disclosure, um, we show the ones that are man-made, and the subtle differences between those and the ones that are extraterrestrial.
Yeah.
And this is like something we give to people in government so that they have some sort of an easy picture book primer, right?
Mhm.
So they can see the difference. Uh, and even with that said, we know that it's become harder and harder to make that distinction. And because of the technology curve. Remember, when Ben Rich said anything you can imagine we've already done at Skunk Works, that was 30 years ago this year in 1995. So imagine what the technology has become as we've gone up the technological ladder over 30 years of R&D using huge sums of money covertly and illegally, but also, as I mentioned, some of the most brilliant scientists I have ever met work on these technologies in covert places. And uh, they're often the people who you will never hear about because they're working in a covert program their whole life, but their entire career, but they're really geniuses. And so when you have the actual hardware in front of you, meaning extraterrestrial devices, materials, electronics, propulsion, all of that, and you have that much almost unlimited money, and some of the most brilliant scientists on Earth for the last 80 years working on this, you're going to have some major breakthroughs, which is where part of the internal logic of this film falls apart. On the one hand, they say we've retrieved these objects and we reverse engineered them, uh, but none of the things flying around are a result of that. Well, that's just
Mhm.
absurd.
Yeah,
That's
it doesn't
utterly
make.
absurd.
Do you think the
Yeah.
president uh, disclosure? There's a financial
Mhm.
caveat to that. Do you think Trump is holding back just to look at the financial? Um, how would the country and the world change overnight, and how would that affect the economy? Do you think that's basically why
Mhm.
Trump is kind of like still holding back on it to look
Well,
at
look,
ramifications financially to the country?
there have always been three big pillars of the secrecy. One is to spin it in a direction that serves the secret government interest, which is global domination, et cetera, and presenting an alien threat that's non-existent. Exactly what Werner von Braun said in 1974. Um, the other is the technology, which, if it was disclosed, would eventually, but it's going to take 15 or 20 years, replace all oil, gas, coal, nuclear, wind, solar, Tesla motor cars, batteries like that. You don't need it. You're going to have something very small that can generate 400 horsepower through an electric motor that'll run your house, your car, whatever. Now, there is another third part of it that I call the legitimate part of the legacy secrecy. And I've said this since the first briefings we did for Clinton back in 1993, 4, and 5. And it's in our archive. I'm very consistent. The things that fly, the so called anti-gravity or electrogravitic propulsion or teleportation systems where things boom move like that. And we do have those. Humans do have those. Those cannot be released at the first level of disclosure because they can be applied immediately by any terrorist organization or unstable failed state as a weapon system. So it's complicated. And I've always been very consistent in saying that stationary, systems that would provide the energy we need to come out, should have come out 100 years ago. Things that fly and zip around that can be a missile delivery system, that can't happen until the world becomes much more stable and much more peaceful than it is now, with a collective security agreement that no one would ever be allowed to use these for kinetic or military or destructive purposes. And if they did, every nation on earth would rise up and force them into submission. Now, we don't have a cooperative agreement like that. But then again, these technologies aren't out. We have thermonuclear, which was bad enough. So that's something that needs to happen. And in terms of the economy, yes, obviously, if the big financial interests that are in the energy sector and those companies don't pivot to this new economy and new technology, they will go out of business, like horse and buggy makers and Royal typewriters that didn't get into the digital world, right?
Do you
So I
think
think that that's what we're going to have to really look at. And that's where I'd say this is all, I think, going to come out. If it comes out truthfully with a frank discussion of the positive payday, let's call it the peace dividend of disclosure technologically, but we're careful about that there's a couple phases of the technologies being able to proliferate. You don't have everything come out at once. Now, that's a very more detailed conversation. And that's really what documentaries and films should be addressing at this point, not a redux of things known for decades and then a false narrative on the rest.
the
We
thing?
need, we really need to do this narrative, and I think that's what we need to work on next with you guys. But
Yeah.
um, that's something that uh, I think the timeline on it is relatively short. It's impossible to say, what that is, whether it's the next few months or a couple of years, but it's certainly not decades. And so I think at this point, we really need to pivot towards a real more mature understanding and conversation, and bring the full truth out, but have a frank discussion of where this needs to go that would be a positive outcome for the earth and humanity. That's what we need to focus on.
Well, I like the free energy idea and release. I think maybe some of the things as well that Trump might be jealous of the limelight. If he brought out disclosure, nobody would be talking about Trump as they do every day in the major media. Just saying. But also the propulsion.
No, I just think that there's not readiness there at that. Look, I know, I don't speculate. I don't care what's being said on the internet. I just think that they're not at a level of understanding or have their arms around the problem at the level of the Oval, or even at Congress. I'll tell you, in Congress, to my knowledge, there are only two people in the Congress. One's in the House and one's in the Senate that we provide material to, who have an adequate understanding. But I think it's a process. What
Hmm.
I'm afraid of is that that process needs to pick up steam, and this film, this Age of Deception, that's what I calling it, film, actually kind of sets that back, because a
Yeah.
lot of the material in there is already baked into the cake that's been out for a long time, and the
Hmm.
part that they're covering up is really the punchline and the most important information.
I know you got to get going here. You got a
Yep.
big meeting ahead of you. Um, there's also what they left out as well is the ability to communicate peacefully with ET,
Right.
and
Sure.
we're going to
Well,
be,
hey,
you know,
here's, yeah, we're going to release a new movie soon called CE5 Contact. And
yeah,
I'm
new
wearing my
frontier of
CE5.
content.
Yeah, it's the new frontier of contact. Why cede the territory altogether to this criminal organization, that are doing it for aggressive and violent purposes? The whole concept of where I started this project in 1990, 35 years ago, was to start a citizens diplomacy effort where humans attempt to make contact with these civilizations in a peaceful paradigm and not a military shoot 'em down paradigm.
Yeah.
And so you can get this app, CE5 Contact. And by the way, you can get this shirt at our store. And I'm wearing my hat. This is the CE5 hat. So when I go out in the field, I'm often wearing this.
There's the merch.
Um, so you can get that for Christmas for yourself or your friends. But
No,
no,
it's crazy though.
I
When
think
we're out
that's
there
why
with
this.
the,
I think
we're out
that's why
there.
this next film is going to be very important because it's something positive
It
that
is.
everyone can do. Because some of these things, even with the access I've had and do have, is very, very frustrating. But going out and doing something you can actually do something about. You can actually be part of this sort of collective of light, making peaceful contact using CE5 contact protocols. And the app takes you through all the training of that, and the movie takes you through that whole experience. We were out for a whole week, as you know, with a
Yeah.
whole group of people with amazing things that happen.
Over
And
500 people were there witnessing it. And we were out in the desert for 2 weeks. Every night something was being caught, and we showcased
yeah,
it in the
yeah,
documentary extraordinary,
yeah.
and people couldn't believe their eyes, and they're getting emotional and they're talking
Hmm.
with them. And CE5, the new frontier of contact, it's really amazing to be out there
Yeah.
in the desert. It was rough, let me tell you. We're out there till like 3 in the morning. It got down to 40 degrees, 38 degrees, 32. Crazy.
Oh, what
But
a bunch of babies. We don't
yeah,
care if it's 20 degrees. And
I'm a
look,
Hawaii boy.
well, look, I want to thank you guys
Yeah.
for what you're doing, and everyone out there. Look for this film. I've got to jump to another meeting right now, but it's been great seeing you again. And I would ask people to get to our archive and see what the real truth is, and see the witnesses, see where these black sites are, learn about the technologies, go look at unacknowledged, and also go look at, again, if you haven't seen it, the Lost Century. We'll put links in there.
Battle for
And
disclosure, asymmetric disclosure, up to date, just
and
filmed
so
last year.
yeah, well, just let me finish. And then what I hope you'll also do is let people know that if this issue comes up about this new film, because it's getting so much press coverage, that it's actually a psyop and a disinformation piece with a little bit of information and a lot of false spin, and that to not give it too much attention. All right, well, I'm going to have to
There.
jump. Thank you guys, and we'll see you soon.
Take care, everybody. Keep your eyes on
Okay,
the sky. We'll
all
see
right,
everybody real
bye bye.
soon.